The air in the basement was thick, oily, and practically unbreathable. The heat from the coal furnaces was overwhelming, but it wasn't the temperature that chilled the officers to the bone. As they opened the iron doors of the boilers, they found charred remains, limbs, torsos, and skulls that had not yet been fully consumed by the flames. In a corner, a dry well had been dug into the floor, filled with quicklime. This chemical was used to dissolve flesh and bone, turning human beings into a nameless, liquid slurry. Scattered around the room were personal effects, a child's shoe, a pair of glasses, a family photograph. Each item was a silent witness to a life that had been systematically erased. This is the well of monsters. A void where hope was traded for a suitcase, and where a doctor's oath was burned to ashes. In the quiet streets of Auxerre, young Marcel wasn't just a troubled child, he was a student of human weakness. While other boys played, Marcel was busy dismantling the world around him. His expulsion from multiple schools wasn't due to a lack of brilliance, he was remarkably intelligent, but because he refused to follow any moral compass. He was caught stealing, not for need, but for the thrill of the take. When his mother died when he was only 12, the last thread of emotional connection to the world seemed to snap. Left with a distant aunt, he learned the most dangerous lesson a predator can acquire: if you are clever enough, you can live entirely in the shadows while standing in the light. World War I provided the perfect backdrop for his developing psyche. In the trenches, Petiot witnessed the industrialization of death. He was wounded and gassed, but the melancholia and mental instability he was diagnosed with weren't just products of shell shock, they were the manifestations of a mind that felt nothing for the suffering of others. He saw thousands of men become mere numbers, and he realized how easily a human being could disappear in the chaos of a broken system. He didn't come home traumatized, he came home with a plan. Exploiting a post-war fast-track program for veterans, Petiot tore through medical school in just 8 months. It was a feat of raw intellect, stripped of any ethical foundation. In 1921, when he received his degree, he didn't take the Hippocratic Oath to heart, he saw it as a contract of immunity. He understood that a doctor is granted entry into the most private spaces of a person's life. He knew that people tell their doctors things they won't tell their priests. He wasn't looking to heal the sick, he was looking for a position of absolute trust where he could observe, manipulate, and eventually, consume. In 1922, Villeneuve-sur-Yonne was a quiet, traditional town, the perfect place for a predator to blend in. Petiot didn't just practice medicine, he performed it. He was the kind of doctor who would visit the poor for free, building a reputation for saint-like devotion while simultaneously overcharging the wealthy and stealing narcotics from the local pharmacy. His charisma was a weapon. By 1926, he had successfully charmed the populace into electing him mayor. Even as rumors of embezzlement and petty theft began to swirl, Petiot simply smiled, his articulate defenses making his accusers look like paranoid fools. He was learning the most important rule: a man in power can hide a body in plain sight. The taste for blood finally manifested in 1926. Louise Delavaux was young, working as Petiot's maid, and, unbeknownst to the town, his lover. When she suddenly vanished, the town was told she had run away to the bright lights of Paris. It was a convenient story, but the truth was far heavier. Late at night, neighbors had watched from behind their curtains as the mayor dragged a massive, awkwardly heavy trunk to his car. No one called the police. Who would report the mayor? Who would suspect the doctor? Louise was never seen again, and for Petiot, her disappearance was a triumph. He had proven that he could make a human being vanish and replace them with a lie that everyone was willing to believe. In 1927, Petiot doubled down on his respectability by marrying Zorzette Lablé, the daughter of a wealthy local landowner. When their son, Gerhard, was born in 1928, the transformation was complete. To the world, Petiot was the pinnacle of the French middle class, a dedicated husband, a father, and a public servant. But behind closed doors, the mask was straining. He wasn't just a family man, he was a thief who couldn't stop. He was caught stealing electricity by bypassing the town's meters and was eventually caught embezzling municipal funds. He was stripped of his titles and disgraced, but he didn't feel shame. He felt restricted. Villeneuve-sur-Yonne had become too small for his ambitions. He needed a city of millions, a place where people were already anonymous. In 1933, he moved his practice to Paris, the perfect hunting ground for a doctor who had mastered the art of the void. Paris in the early 1940s was a city of whispers and terror. The secret police was everywhere, and for many, the only hope was escape. Petiot purchased the townhouse at 21 Rue Le Sueur specifically for its layout. It wasn't just a home, it was a fortress of redirected exits and soundproofed walls. Under the alias Dr. Eugène, he leaked word into the underworld that he was the head of Fly-Tox, an escape network with high-level connections. He didn't just offer a service, he offered a miracle. But the price of the miracle was 25,000 francs, often the entire life savings of a family, and their absolute blind trust. The psychological cruelty of Petiot was most evident in his pre-departure ritual. He would lead his victims, often entire families, into a small, triangular room in the basement. He told them that Argentina required a series of vaccinations against tropical diseases. To a desperate person, this sounded like the voice of authority, the final step towards safety. But the syringes were filled with a lethal dose of cyanide. As the liquid entered their veins, Petiot would step out, lock the heavy iron door, and retreat into a darkened corridor. There, he had installed a secret, one-way peephole. He didn't just want to kill, he wanted to observe the exact moment when the realization hit them, that the doctor was not their savior, but their butcher. Once the silence returned to the basement, the clinical phase ended and the scavenging began. Petiot was meticulous. He stripped the bodies of gold teeth, wedding rings, and hidden gems sewn into coat linings. He then moved to their luggage. He didn't burn their clothes or discard their memories, he sorted them. He neatly packed their belongings into suitcases. 47 of them were eventually found, creating a twisted library of lives he had extinguished. He sold their furs and furniture, effectively profiting from every single atom of their existence. For Petiot, a human being was simply a container of assets that needed to be emptied. By March 1944, the basement at 21 Rue Le Sueur was overflowing. The quicklime pits were saturated, and the dry well Petiot had dug to dissolve bodies could no longer keep up with his pace. In a desperate attempt to clear the backlog of evidence, Petiot began running his coal furnaces at maximum capacity. The result was a thick, oily, black smoke that didn't just rise, it settled over the neighborhood like a funeral shroud. The stench of burning hair and marrow was so putrid that neighbors began to vomit in the streets. Fearing a massive chimney fire, the local fire brigade was summoned. They broke down the heavy doors, expecting to fight flames. Instead, they found a scene that looked like a portal to hell. The furnaces were stuffed with human torsos and limbs, and the floor was littered with bones that hadn't yet turned to ash. As the police arrived to investigate the charnel house, a man calmly pedaled up to the scene on a bicycle. It was Marcel Petiot. In an act of sociopathic genius, he didn't flee, he approached the lead officer. He didn't look like a killer, he looked like a worried patriot. He leaned in and whispered to the officers that he was a leader in the French resistance. He pointed to the remains in the furnace and claimed they were the bodies of Nazis, the secret police informants, and traitors to France. In 1944 Paris, the police hated the German occupiers as much as anyone else. Petiot played on their nationalism, warning them that if they made a scene, the secret police would arrive and arrest everyone for interfering with resistance business. The police, paralyzed by the complex politics of the occupation and genuinely believing they were talking to a hero, stood aside. They actually helped him gather some sensitive documents before letting him cycle away into the foggy Parisian afternoon. By the time they realized the resistance hero was actually a monster who had murdered innocent refugees, Petiot had vanished into the gray shroud of the city. While the French police and the secret police were both scouring Paris for the butcher, Marcel Petiot was busy reinventing himself. He grew a thick, unkempt beard, donned a tattered military jacket, and took the name Captain Henri Valery. In a move of staggering psychological brilliance, he didn't flee the city, he embedded himself in the French forces of the interior. As Paris erupted in the chaos of the liberation in August 1944, Petiot was there, rifle in hand. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a leader. He commanded a unit of men who looked up to him as a battle-hardened patriot. He spent his days patrolling the streets and his nights treating the wounds of resistance fighters with the same surgical hands that had injected cyanide into innocent families just months prior. He walked past his own wanted posters every day, perhaps even pausing to read them with a mocking smile, knowing that his new brothers in arms would die to protect their captain. Petiot's downfall wasn't caused by a lapse in his disguise, but by his uncontrollable need for the spotlight. Even as Captain Valéry, he couldn't stop obsessing over his own infamy. He began writing letters to local newspapers, defending the slandered Dr. Petiot. He argued that the bodies found were collaborators executed by the resistance. It was a fatal mistake. A detective noticed that the letters contained specific medical and legal details that only the real Petiot could know. More importantly, the handwriting and the arrogant, condescending tone matched the missing doctor perfectly. The police stopped looking for a man in hiding and started looking for a man in uniform. On October 31, 1944, the trap was sprung at a Paris metro station. As the officers closed in, Petiot didn't flinch. He didn't look like a mass murderer, he looked like a soldier. He pulled out his FFI identity papers and shouted at the police, accusing them of being traitors for arresting a patriot of France. He played the part of the offended hero until the very second the handcuffs clicked shut. When they searched him, the mask finally began to shatter. In his pockets, they found 31,000 francs, the blood money of his victims. They found 50 different sets of identity cards and a gold brooch that belonged to one of the families who had disappeared into his basement. Even then, as he was led away to La Santé prison, he looked the detectives in the eye and told them they were making a mistake. He truly believed he was smarter than the law. He believed he was the master of the void. When the trial opened in March 1946, the world was still reeling from the horrors of the Holocaust. Petiot sat in the prisoner's dock, not as a broken man, but as a defiant intellectual. He wore a sharp suit and a smirk that never faded. He spent the days cracking jokes, mocking the judge, and even drawing caricatures of the jury while they listened to the gruesome details of his crimes. He took the stand and admitted to the killings, not with shame, but with pride. He claimed to be the leader of a high-level resistance cell, asserting that he had executed 63 enemies of France. He painted himself as a hero who had operated in the darkest shadows of the occupation to protect his country. For a moment, his charisma was so potent that some in the gallery actually began to wonder if the doctor was being framed by a vengeful state. The prosecution knew they couldn't win on words alone against a master manipulator. They needed the physical truth. In a moment that silenced the courtroom, they wheeled in 47 suitcases recovered from the home and his various hiding spots. They began to open them. Out fell the real legacy of Dr. Eugène. There were no Nazi uniforms. There were no spy documents. Instead, the floor was covered in the small, worn shoes of children. There were silk dresses with family heirlooms still pinned to the fabric. There were prayer books and Hanukkah lamps. The patriot was revealed to be a scavenger who had stalked the most vulnerable people on earth. He hadn't executed soldiers, he had liquidated families who had trusted him with their lives and their last centimes. The Dr. Satan was exposed not as a soldier, but as a predator who turned genocide into a profitable business venture. The jury took only minutes to return their verdict. Marcel Petiot was found guilty of 26 counts of murder, though the true number was likely double that. Even as the death sentence was read, Petiot didn't flinch. He looked at the judge and whispered, "I will be avenged." He was returned to his cell, where he spent his final days writing a book on how to win at games of chance, a final, mocking middle finger to the society he had preyed upon. On the morning of May 25, 1946, the end of the road arrived. At 5:07 a.m., Petiot was led to the courtyard of the Santé prison. He refused the traditional glass of rum and the final cigarette. He walked toward the guillotine with a steady, clinical pace, his eyes as cold and observant as they had been in his basement clinic. As he was positioned beneath the blade, he turned to the executioner and uttered his final, chilling words, "I am a traveler taking his luggage with him." It was his last joke, a reference to the victims whose luggage he had stolen. The blade fell with a heavy thud, finally silencing the man who had turned medicine into a massacre. The butcher of Paris was dead, but the ghost of 21 Rue Le Sueur would haunt France for generations. Marcel Petiot was the ultimate proof that a medical degree and a polite smile can be the deadliest weapons in a predator's arsenal. He didn't just kill, he consumed the lives, the hopes, and the memories of those who trusted him. What do you think was the true catalyst? Did the chaos of the war create the monster, or was Marcel always a hollow shell waiting for the right moment to strike? I want to read your theories in the comments. If you want to continue uncovering the truth behind history's most calculated minds, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Make sure your notifications are on, you won't want to miss our next descent into the dark. Thanks for watching, and remember, the most dangerous faces are often the ones you trust the most. I'll see you at the bottom of the well.